I'm Cindy O'Kane. I just want to welcome everybody today. We have just a couple of announcements, and then I'm going to turn this over to two speakers that we have today. Our keynote speaker, Kathy Essig, who's here, and also our own Amy Jones, who's going to follow her for a brief overview of what's going on at Langley in the realm that Kathy's going to discuss. So just to let you know, you probably know, the book fair is going on this week. Today's your last day if you want to go, and so there's you can buy books, you can buy birthday books, you can buy Langley wear, and that's going on until 4 o'clock today. So thank you for anybody and everybody who's volunteered on that. It's kind of a big effort, as you guys know, but the kids love it, and Kim Serena and Eleanor Christensen say it's going great. So I'm glad about that. The faculty and staff appreciation luncheon, that's going to be Wednesday, December 14th. And the theme is Winter Wonderland. You guys know that this is a really fun event, and there's a couple more slots open, so if we have any volunteers that want to help, I think we're looking for 2 or 3 more people. It would be great. Teachers love it. It's a feel-good event, as most of them are. You can see Sarah Magner or Tammy Donnelly if you want to talk more about that, or sign up. I'm going to ask Meredith to just come up quickly to spring auction, just a highlight.
Oh, okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. Excuse me, sorry, I wasn't expecting. Just wanted to come up and quickly plug the auction, which will be on April 22nd. Our theme this year is Langley in Wonderland, and it's going to be, which actually dovetails very nicely with the teacher luncheon. Now that I think about it. Yeah. So it's a Wonderland this year. We're very excited. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we are looking forward to having as many people as possible. We would love to get some awesome items. We're looking for trips and all kinds of chef's tables at restaurants, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're hoping to have a big crowd this year. So mark it off on your calendars.
Thank you. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about executive function, and a lot of you who were here last time remember that this is some questions came up around this and sort of the frontal lobe and helping our kids manage how they have to manage their lives and manage school. And thankfully, Debbie Rosen introduced to us Kathy Essig, who is her partner and friend in the business world. And she's going to help us better understand what executive function is, sort of how it impacts our kids, what we need to look for with them in terms of their development in this realm. She's going to talk first for about 50 minutes, I think, maybe close to an hour. And then I'm going to introduce after Amy Jones, who's going to wrap up and talk about what Langley is doing in this realm to help our kids develop in this way. So I'm really happy to give you a warm welcome. I want to do a quick highlight about your background. Very impressive. I have to read it. Okay. Masters of Education from Marymount University and over 30 years of experience in the field of childhood development and education. As a special education diagnostician and the creator of the Upper School Learning Center at the Potomac School, Kathy's been observing students over the years and watching them with their executive function, the frontal lobe, and their development, and seeing kids at every level on the spectrum of that, and has helped adapt school curriculum to better support them. Now she's an independent consultant and executive function coach, and works with our own Debbie Rosen to help kids in the DC area and is in private practice. So please welcome Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me today. You know, this is a really important discussion for 2 points. First, as a community, we have to think about our kids with what we know about science today. Science has given us, over the last about 10 years, a lot of information that helps us understand where our children become vulnerable and when they come back to us. Because what we're going to discuss today is developmental, but it's not a course that everybody takes in exact lockstep, and not even in close lockstep to what other developmental steps happen. This can have a spread of 10 to 15 years from one child to another of when they become fully developed. The other piece that you're very lucky to have is because of that huge developmental spread, schools are struggling. And many schools aren't discussing this because we don't know what to do with it. When I first started discussing it in earnest in the private schools, we threw our hands up. Everybody said between what parents expect in admissions and what we expect in a curriculum, and where kids can be on a spectrum that could be 10 to 15 years. How do we come up with a scope and sequence? So it's a discussion that schools are beginning to have. The schools that are willing to openly have it, I commend, because as an educator, as a psychologist, I'm really intrigued with this. As an educator, I'm overwhelmed by it because the scope and sequence is really difficult to deal with. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what can happen in schools, what's happening in your school, what parents can do, and what we have to expect given that this is a natural progression for kids, and where we have to really consider where they are in the moment. So we're going to talk about what exactly is executive function, how it affects learning, and it affects it individually, it affects it collectively and individually. We're going to talk about how you can recognize when your children's skills maybe aren't keeping pace with the demands of the curriculum. If you are there, you know it's like hitting a brick wall. We also are going to talk about what you can do to bolster skills before the vulnerability kicks in. So what is executive function? When we put it in layman's terms, a lot of people call it the brain manager, because it is the part of the brain that really coordinates time management, organization, planning, prioritizing, shifting, transitions, initiation, completion, inhibition, emotional control, self-regulation, and working memory. And that's a lot. So really, actually what it is, if you look at it more scientifically, it's the development of the prefrontal cortex. It's early in the morning, excuse me. It's this section of your brain right here. It's the frontal lobes. And it's the area of the brain that's last to develop. The actual maturation of this section of the brain begins to fully develop somewhere between 14 and 19. For girls, it can continue to develop, they're realizing now, until about 25, and that's new information in the past year. Prior to that, we thought women were fully developed and what we call pruning, getting rid of the information we don't need, somewhere around 20. Now we're realizing there's about a 5-year spread for girls, for some girls that are on the slower end of development. For boys, who actually are slower than girls in this development, and it's absolutely natural and maturationally correct. Most males do not hit the start of completing development until their 20s, and it goes till 30. So as I just heard a bunch of parents sigh and some heads walk down, the good news.
We're thinking about our husbands, actually.
I'm not thinking about my husband because he's 55 and hasn't fully developed yet. So that one's a done deal.
Well, I'm thinking about my wife.
There you go. What the good news for those of you that have boys, honestly, when we've done studies about why men come out of grad school making more money than women, unfortunately, we led them until that PhD time. And then they're more creative than we are because we're backing off and starting to prune. So that might be an indication of why men come out of grad school, sometimes making more than women. It's one hypothesis that people are throwing out. And for those of us with boys, I have a boy that I always said, please God, please God, please God. And he just graduated from college, and I saw a miraculous growth in his senior year when he actually graduated. So it does kick in, and you'll see it, it's palpable. But what this is actually is, this term is an umbrella term, because what the prefrontal cortex is and what the frontal lobes are, it's the management area for organization and regulation. And that's all of this falls into either organization or regulation. And we develop the organization skills before we develop the regulation skills. The final piece that works into it is working memory. And that's the piece that we really stress, not like I'm stressing in the way I am speaking, but stress in bring it to a breaking point, often in curriculum, because working memory is the ability to anticipate the future, to take past information and present requirements and deal with them considering the future. And kids can't do that, but they're asked that throughout high school in all of the projects and the papers and the testing that goes into all of the analytical thinking that we need them to have before college. We want them to have in high school, but they aren't. In intellect, they're totally ready. In process, they could be anywhere on the continuum from I'm okay to no, I'm not okay. And weirdly, it's all developmentally appropriate. So why does it matter? It matters because these are the skills that are going to take us into being successful adults. These are the skills that are our life skills. This is what we need for success. You can be brilliant, but if you can't get it done, you're not going to keep the job. You can be the master at something, but when you don't meet requirements, people don't see your intellect. And that's the problem that begins in about 5th and 6th grade and can take people on a journey of feeling less than for a lot of years. This is executive dysfunction creates a tremendous amount of vulnerability because very, very, very bright people all of a sudden feel that they aren't intelligent, that they aren't able to do. And we don't separate out for them as the adults in their lives, no matter who they are, because it's hard for us to understand the difference. That intellect and process are two very different things. And the older you get in school and the closer you get high school, college, and beyond, process pay actually plays a much larger place. These kids were, and here's the other odd part, people with executive dysfunction often also correlate to having the highest superior IQs. It's the way the body just kind of takes care of itself. That because I am very, very high here, I'm going to be more average here because that's how the body heals itself so that we don't kind of go over edges. And in that happening, it makes the child from the point usually where they start changing classes, 5th, 6th grade, straight through until their executive skills kick in, incredibly vulnerable. So we just like this cartoon, but I put it in here because I was thinking of a story that, you know, somebody had said to me, when did you start thinking about this? And I think I actually, well, I know I started thinking about it in grad school, and I'm old enough that when I was in grad school, this was not a term we used. But I think I actually started thinking about it between 1st and 4th grade, because there were two men that I thought were geniuses. One was my bus driver. His name was Keith. And I lived in well, I thought it was a small town, a smallish town. I lived outside of Albany. And Keith was, in my mind, brilliant because when we would get on the bus, kids would fight to get on the bus early because he could help us with anything. He could answer any questions. He could do math. He could pull history like that. He could refer to the stories we were reading. He could do anything. And I thought he was amazing. And I often wondered, gee, why is he a bus driver? The other person that I thought was a genius was his boss. And Keith always told us, you have to pay attention in school. Don't do what I did. I didn't go to college. The other person that I thought was a genius was his boss and my father, who had a PhD from an Ivy League school. He was the superintendent of schools. And I often would talk to my dad after I got older about, you know, why didn't somebody push Keith? He was so smart. When I was a kid, if you didn't do school well in New York, you were tracked into something we called BOCES. You took mechanics, you took plumbing, you took things in high school that were going to get you a job out of school. And that was appropriate in the 70s and 80s. You know, parents weren't saying, no, I want more for my child, at least where I was. On the other hand, today, if somebody has that level of intellectual curiosity across the board, and that level of reading and depth of knowledge, we would never say, why don't you go be a bus driver, unless that was their absolute passion in life. I have a few friends who used to be lawyers and now are doing things like that, because most of them are being cooks at this point because they just decided they were going to go do something else. But I don't think Keith had a shot at college from the way he talked about it. And that always rang in my head as, God, that's wrong. Because I just thought it was amazing that he could answer anything in my mind. I mean, I was a kid, but in my mind, between first and fourth grade, he could answer anything. And in talking to my dad later, who met him and talked to him because he drove my father's children and we were so in love with Keith, agreed that this was an incredibly, incredibly smart person. Today, science has told us that these are the kids we have to stick with, that we can't turn them into the bus drivers unless they choose to, or the plumbers unless they choose to. And God knows I just redid my house. That plumber's making good money. So I have no issue with that, but I do have an issue with, you know, we as an American society for a long time tracked kids. And I think it was based on process. And thank heavens we don't do that anymore, because now with everything we know, this is developmental and we can get them through it. So I spoke a little bit about the brain developing from the brainstem forward. And so at birth, well, actually in utero, we start this development. But as it moves forward, this part of our brain is the last to develop. And this is a time lapse that was done, I think, at Harvard, but it's really cool. So you're going to see. What do I have to do?
Push down.
Okay, Debbie. What do I have to do? I'm pushing.
No.
Okay. Turn to the next slide then. Basically, what you were going to see. What you were going to see is at 5, this is what the brain looks like. And the lobes that are developed are mostly to the back of the brain. They're the communication, their movement. We keep coming down and down and down. But if we look, we have this brain is 20, and it's pretty fully developed in blue, because you're never going to get completely blue. Everybody's going to have areas that are slightly weaker than other areas. But this brain took to 20 to fully develop from the brainstem forward. And in looking at that, think of everything that was asked of this person prior to full development. And it's everything that has to be asked, because we have to train children to write. We have to train children to be analytical thinkers. We have to train in their close reading and in their higher math skills. And in doing all of that, we're doing some of the process training before they can fully, you have a question?
Is it developing because we're training it, or is it training because we're like?
It will develop even without us training it.
School or anything?
100%. This will develop without us training it. And interesting, this developmental process goes back to what we call the mammalian brain. And what happened was, and the reason women actually complete the development earlier, the role of the female was to be in the house, protecting the children, raising the children, doing the female activities. The role of the men was, first I become part of the tribe that's hunting, and as I get older, I become the leader of the tribe that's hunting. So the male brain had to continue to grow because their ability to be eaten became larger and larger and larger as they had to be in control of which way are we turning, and is it us or is it the animal? So women didn't need to use the higher order thinking for as long. We developed into a role earlier than men. So this development actually occurs with or without any training, and it has occurred since the time of prehistory.
If you were to take that line out to, let's say, 60, as an example, does it ever reverse?
So actually you take the line to 70 and it starts to reverse. Normally you can see the regeneration in areas as people are building across. You'll see areas become lighter and darker as people are building in their careers. And then as retirement sets in, you know how people say when you retire, all of a sudden, if somebody was super healthy and super together, if they aren't doing anything for a while, all of a sudden they're getting fuzzy or they're getting ill. Well, you can actually see it in the fMRIs, that it's between 70 and 80. You see reversals backwards, and it reverses front to back. So we start becoming confused on organization. We start becoming confused on when we're supposed to get things done. We start becoming confused on some of the processes that were our final processes, and then we move backwards towards communication and Alzheimer's and things like that. But yes, it does reverse.
The baseline's screwed.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, because again, it's a continuum. It's a wonderful continuum. So some of us are, some of us aren't. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm somewhere in the communication some days when I can't think. My word retrieval can be horrible these days. I used to blame it on pregnancy, but I can't do that anymore.
There are a lot of the technical terms you use as opposed to some of the terms my wife uses.
Yeah.
So even if a person does not retire and works until death, let's say 90 years old, we will see the backwards evolution.
People who stay involved in retirement, who do a lot of, even if I'm not working, if I keep up with my field, if I volunteer, the people who go in and do something one day a week, the people who become involved in other social groups tend to not have as quick a reversal as people who just say, I'm retired, now what?
And this is a male or a female?
This is a female brain. Male brain isn't gonna look so blue. We got 10 more years. And literally, boys do a ton of development in their 20s. And all for great reasons, but a ton of development in their 20s.
And this is for people within the average spectrum, like an autistic child would have a different kind
That's
of.
totally different, yeah.
But and you see,
This is normal development.
You see the difference in an autistic child in the brain?
You can see differences from the start of the brainstem up, because there are communication issues, there are tactile issues, there are lots of issues that you can see. That's another whole lecture. But yes, on an fMRI, you can see the differences. So here is how executive function kind of develops over the years. Basically, we have self-directed attention when we're younger. I can focus on this puzzle that I'm working on. I have self-restraint. The child next to me, at some point, when they sit down and say, gee, I like the puzzle, and touch it, I don't hit them anymore. I'm self-directed sensing. I like what I like. I'm moving towards things I like instead of somebody putting something in front of me. I have self-speech. I can talk to myself. I can make myself feel better. I can set up the steps if I have to remember something. I have self-directed emotion. I can calm myself. I'm self-motivated. I see the importance of what I need to do. And finally, I'm self-directed. I see the importance and I can see the future and know how to get there. That development takes minimally about 15 years. So what we have to keep in mind is this is a continuum, and it's a maturationally appropriate continuum. And then the overlay, it's an individual continuum. So anything that Amy or I were to say to you about collective steps of where kids can be, yours may or may not be there, and that may still be absolutely appropriate. So what plays against that is the demands in high stakes schools often will push against our children's executive functions. And again, where they are is appropriate. And what we need to realize is where they are is appropriate. They are probably highly intelligent if they're very slow in executive function, and we have to externalize the processes in order for their success. And that's the piece where we come together as a community and parents follow the lead of what the school is asking, and you can actually build external skills for your children until they internalize them. And the really cool part about this is if you stand in lockstep and believe in it, one day you'll be sitting there and it'll be palpable. You will see that light bulb go off for them. And it's been that next shift. And it'll happen several times, but the first time it happens, it's very cool. Because I have a lot of parents, because I was primarily working at the high school level when I was last in school, always in school. I've always been at the high school level. The interesting part is things start to fall apart for most kids at about 11 or 12, but at 16, I would have parents sitting in my office in tears saying, thank God, my kid's back. And from then on, it just gets better. And it's something, particularly in boys, about that summer before their junior year, that life gets better again, that we start seeing there will be a light wherever the end of this tunnel is. So, what are some warning signs? You will see the first warning signs probably the first time, and this could be before your children are changing classes between teachers, when there are multi-step directions. Children struggle mightily with multi-step directions, planning all of the elements of something. I saw the first, often I saw the first, I saw the last, and I completely missed the middle. And I swear, up, down, left, right, and sideways, what I've done is complete, and I'm incredibly proud of it. And how do we tell you, wait, it's not quite so complete, without completely shattering your self-worth? That's the first place. And I will say now, all kids are vulnerable. Some kids are highly vulnerable. So this is something that everybody will have some level of, let me show you something a little different to make it easier. But some kids have, let me show you a lot of what we're going to have to do differently. So that's a first time, second or third grade, where you might see They are not understanding that there's a lot of directions here. They don't have a clue why the teacher gave them multiple nights to work on this. They are seeing it as a small function when it's a much larger function. And there's nothing wrong, parents will be like, oh my God, I need a reading specialist. No, you don't. They just aren't getting the parts. They might not comprehend how long a project will take. Again, I said the working memory is the last to kick in. So let's go back to the younger kid. Anticipating the future. They live in the moment. They have no clue how to anticipate the future. And when they say something that makes no sense to you, they aren't just being impulsive or smart alecky or whatever. This is really their plan, because they don't know how to anticipate the future. Sometimes we can just sit there and be like, what did you say? And that's the best they can do. Telling stories, it can be verbally or in writing, but usually these are highly, highly, highly verbal kids. And then they go to write and it's 3 words. And you're like, are you kidding? Can you extend that? Did you mean something by that? What are you doing? And it's usually the differentiation between what they can say and what they write. And they don't like to write. And it's not that they don't have a lot to say. Talk to text has become a wonderful gift for kids with executive function, because they do have a lot to say. They can't organize it. It comes out all mishmash. It makes sense to them, and someone else says, I have no clue what you wrote, and they're crushed. So I just won't write. That's easier. If you don't like it, ask me about it, and I'll tell you about it. And that's what many kids develop as a coping strategy. They struggle to communicate the details in an organized and sequenced manner. That's the writing issues. If I can't organize it, I'm not going to do it. In my work with kids, I often will take their paragraph and we will cut it up into sentences and lay them all out. And then we play the what's first, what's second, what's third. I take it out of a complete sequence, and then we play with what could come next. And because they're all cut apart, we make a puzzle out of it. And younger kids love that. Older kids tolerate me doing it because they know when I cut it up for older kids, they're like, I'm gonna fail, right? I'm like, well, I don't think you're gonna get the best grade if we leave it like this. And they're willing to tolerate it. But little kids like playing that puzzle game. So memorizing and retrieving information, it has nothing to do with their memory. I overtalk, so I asked to find out when I was halfway through, and we're not halfway through. So I'm going to speed it up. It has nothing to do with their memory. They do not know how to actively engage with their work, particularly with screens now. I stare at the screen. That's passive. It's going to take me 3 times as long. So they don't actively engage with their work, and that's part of executive function. They don't initiate their activities. A half an hour to them could be the rest of the night if you say you have to start in a half an hour. I time kids, put them on timers. Retaining information goes back to the memory piece. So they may be a lot of things. What they aren't is lazy. We have to be very careful of our words and our descriptors when we're frustrated, because they will remember it forever. A student I worked with who was a junior in high school and went to a very prestigious private school in the city 2 years ago, I could not figure out for the life of me why he had such a horrible opinion of himself, and really his was all emotional overlay, and I could not break through it. And then one day he told me that his nickname when he was very young was Spoon. And his father had nicknamed him one night when he had done something goofy. And I said, why Spoon? And he said, because my dad said, you're not very sharp, you don't hit much. This was a 17-year-old who was self-sabotaging because somebody had teasingly said something lovingly when I brought his dad in and said, okay, I think I've gotten to the root of it. You have to apologize. He burst into tears and said, oh my God, that was just a joke in a moment. And he laughed, so we kept going with it. We got to be careful what we say because the kids hang on to it forever. So basically what we have to remember is no matter how frustrated it seems, no matter how much it seems like this makes no sense, they are not lazy. And in fact, they're trying really hard and they know something's wrong and they don't know how to deal with it. So they deal with it in ways that are age appropriate for them, but really not appropriate for their success. So we tend to see when they hit 6th grade and things kind of hit the metal now. Workload increase, they're swapping classes. There's not a teacher helping them clean out their desk anymore. They have to move things back and forth. They're asked to bring homework back more regularly. It's not obvious to the parents what exactly is due all the time. Some schools have great ways of communicating that. Some schools say, your kid has to become more independent. Your kid has to become more independent. Transitions are horrible because when you move to many of the high schools, the talk is they have to be independent because we only have 4 years to college. If they're not independent, we got 4 years to them failing. So we have to meet them where they are. The strong executive function kids, these are disproportionately girls, are going to create their work plans. They're going to turn in work. Their binder's going to be beautiful. They're going to take great notes. The teacher's always going to pick them for the one to share notes when somebody's sick. The teacher's going to always pick them when we're moving quickly and I need an answer that's right. I can't play, extend, extend, extend. The kids who have executive dysfunction see this. And every time it's not me, my self-worth gets a little lower and a little lower. And what happens, and what we really as parents need to shore up, is we start a failure cycle. Predominantly boys. Okay, so when we get into that cycle of anxiety, girls tend to become perfectionists, boys tend to become avoiders. And we can look at, if you've ever read any of Brene Brown's vulnerability work, we can look at how we, as a society, ask boys to grow to men, and it all makes sense. The boys take on this idea of, I'd rather choose to fail than try and fail. I'm gonna look a lot better to everybody if I go, what do I care? I hate school anyway, and I don't want to do this. Inside, they're dying. Outside, bravado. So the failure cycle is something that they're doing a lot of studies on right now because it's a big deal with executive function. That the child, as they grow, realizes, I shouldn't, I'm too smart. This shouldn't be happening. I shouldn't be doing this. And the anxiety becomes a secondary symptom. The executive function is going to go away, but the anxiety is going to stay for life. So we have to pull through, and really this is where the parents play a huge role, because we have to pull through saying, you're fine and I love you, and loving the child in front of you rather than the dream you had or may have again for them. Because it's all in how we phrase as to how they come out the other side. So if we combine academic anxiety and executive function, what occurs is there's a decreased sense of self-worth. There's more family dysfunction because the fights begin. There's more social isolation. The kids often develop really, really poor sleep to the point that they're going in and being tested for sleep disorders. There is self-esteem that's being nicked left, right, and sideways. There's social media overstimulation, and there's feeling overscheduled. They feel overwhelmed. Social media overstimulation is something, again, that parents can do a lot early to protect your children from later, because they're doing studies now on kids who are susceptible to addiction and how the internet and social media can become incredibly addictive. And it's a way that they soothe themselves, but obviously it's incredibly disruptive. So what can we do? We have to remember that this part of the brain develops between 14 and 19. We'd like it to be earlier because it would make our lives easier, but it's just not going to be. The brain is making the fastest connections during that time. That you will never again have another time where you develop that quickly. This time frame goes back to the same kind of brain development that kids had as toddlers. They are building. They need to sleep. They need to eat well. And often they are so overstimulated and over-scheduled that they're staying up till the middle of the night to do work. So what we can do as parents, the first thing we have to do is maintain our relationship with them. We have to meet them where they are. And some days you look at them and you think, oh my God, were you hit by a bus? How could you have thought that makes sense? But it does. But for them, it does. They're not being outrageous. They're not being lazy. This is where they're making their connection. They think this makes sense. So we have to meet them where they are, and we have to meet them where they are with as much praise and as little condemnation as we can. When working with the children, we have to be emotionless. They are going to need your support on certain homework pieces. But you have to be, if you cannot be emotionless, don't help them. Get someone else to help them. And that's huge because it's not a tutor you're looking for. There are homework coaches, there are centers like ours, but get somewhere where you can put them, take them to Starbucks if they're old enough. If you cannot be emotionless, don't work with them, because the things you may say that you don't even realize they're catching, and they're thinking, wow, they think I'm as worthless as I think I am. And that's the piece, that's the biggest piece for parents that we have to stay away from. We have to praise them on process versus content, or content versus process. As they get older, not here, when you get to high school, you will notice if you look at the rubrics that a majority of many of the grades are process grades. So they may know everything and have gotten a C or a D or an F because they didn't follow the directions. You still praise them on the process. And the bigger thing to do is to say, don't you feel good though about how much you know about this? We can fix the direction that you missed. Don't you feel good about how much you know? Make them acknowledge their intellect. Make them acknowledge that they're proud of the things they can do well. So homework is a place where parents say, where do I step in? Where don't I step in? I will say, both as a practitioner and a parent, don't do it for them. You have your degree. There are so many times when you're just like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Give it to me. How can you not know where to put the commas? Don't do it, because you're not helping anybody. All you're doing is helping soothe your frustration. And quite frankly, I'm thinking back on, this was at Potomac. We had a kid who was a phenomenal reader. He was an okay writer. He had huge executive dysfunction. He had a great English teacher who brought his papers to me and was like, there is no way he wrote this. Here's what he wrote in school. Here's what he wrote at home. And this one literally looked like it could be an English dissertation. And so she pulled him up and she had circled a few choice SAT words that we knew he didn't know. And she said, okay, Brian, can you define them for me? And he looked at her and said, thank you. Will you call my mother and tell her to stop editing my papers when I go to bed? And so the teacher called his mom and said, you are a brilliant writer. Don't write your kids' papers anymore. And we know, as teachers, we know. And the kids know. And it makes the kids feel that, you think they can't do it. Instead, like if they're horrible at commas, line 1, you're missing 3 commas. Can you find where they need to go? Line 7, that's a run-on sentence. What are we going to do about it? Whatever you need to do to make them go back and do the edits, but don't do it for them. The other thing that you need to do, establish times that you dedicate to homework. We so often say, you know, we have them at big schools. We have them in big sports. We have them in big activities. We are building that resume, speaking as a parent who has kids who have graduated just now, thank God, the second one from college. We're building that resume when they get to high school and beyond. Don't take so much time building the resume that you don't give them time to do their work. You have to, while they're here, show them the most important thing is school. And everything else falls in behind it as much as we can do. And if we can't do all of it, we're going to make decisions on what we can do, but school is not the thing we take away. We don't do 4 travel teams and maybe get homework done. Homework takes X time for you, and we need enough white space in the evening to get it done. As parents, if we don't give that gift to our children, we've set them up for failure. And you know what? As someone who had a child that went on to the NCAA, yeah, he didn't make the Olympics. So there's a point where everything ends. And, you know, I was that 4:30 in the morning, get up and, no, I wasn't. I was that 4:30 in the morning, hit my husband to get up and take him to swimming, and everything ends. So I'm not saying it wasn't a phenomenal addition to his success and his feelings of self-worth, but really school's what got him the job, not swimming. Make sure that outside activities don't overwhelm time. And having said that, I got a kid up at 4:30 and I'm standing here. So as parents, we do the best we can, but give them the time. This is what I think should be a routine and a structure for younger kids. That you're home, I'm going to give everybody slides if you want them. You're home and you have 30 minutes to decompress before you start work. And then there is a structure where you will help them plan if they need planning, or let them be independent if they don't, and then they come to you and tell you the plan. Then if they need time, you set timers. You don't sit there checking your watch because that will freak them out. You move away from the situation as much as you can, but you keep coming back in and saying, let me see how you're going. That's brilliant. Let's put it in your backpack. You teach them that they have to load the backpack so they have the things. Get double-sided plastic, I don't know, teachers might be asking for something else. I love for in their binders, the double-sided plastic folder on the front, to do, on the back, completed. If there's something in to do, that's tonight's homework. As soon as I finish it, I put it in the back. Tomorrow when I open my binder in class, if there's something incompleted, even if my teacher forgets to ask for it, Miss Jones, I got work, do you want it? So that they learn to always get credit for the work they have. So this is what I say is younger. And you are really involving yourself when they're young to teach them the schedule. Then as they move into older elementary school and intermediate school, you establish the same schedule you had before, but now they're taking more ownership. By this point, they're prioritizing the work themselves when they set up their schedule. And science tells us for kids, for any kid, but definitely for a kid with executive dysfunction, they will be more efficient and work through their homework better if they start with the easiest thing on the list for that night, to wake up all of the neural pathways. Then they move to the hardest. It's earliest in the day. There's the best light they're ever going to have. They are the most awake they're ever going to be. Their alertness and the outside environment makes for their greatest success. then you shift attention because the brain is tired, body's tired, they've been in school all day, and you shift. Easy, hard, easy, hard, easy, hard. You number that plan and you don't deviate. They will be most efficient and they will get the best grades if the homework is graded because they're shifting attention and they are sticking to a plan that they said, this is going to be my very way of working.
I'm sorry, would you change that if they do a sport after school? So they've already had their easy resting moment?
No, because you know what? Thanks to the Beltway, there's a whole bunch of adrenaline that's come back as they're coming home. And so I still say they need water, they need something to eat, they need a little bit of downtime to organize their books up, and then we get going.
And then easy hard?
Then easy hard. And basically, if you then have to leave to go to something, the time you vary it is, we have 30 minutes until we have to move on to the next activity that we have to drive to. And you get them to start thinking about planning for time management. Which assignment here is going to give you 30 minutes of work before we leave? And you stick that in, and then you come back when you have a fuller block of time and do your easy hard.
So you said downtime to organize their books.
Yeah.
Is the downtime, because my kids would expect actual downtime where they can lounge and, I mean, so organizing their books.
So downtime is I take my backpack to wherever I do my homework. I hand over my phone. If I need to put self-control on my computer, I hit self-control. I get water, I get something to eat. I, sit for 10 or 15 minutes with the comics or TV show or counting air molecules or whatever I do for my downtime. And then I get to work. But there is some organization in that time. Because when I get to work, I'm making my plan and I'm taking off. And work starts with, the first thing you do is plan before you count number one on easy. So these are the key takeaways for daily routines. Homework help rarely improves your relationship with your children as they get older. And the more you get anxious and interject yourself, the more they are going to push back, and the more, as they get older, the more fights there will be. And in high school, there are real fights. Establishing a non-changing routine early where you have proven to them school is number one and everything else comes behind it is important. Don't threaten what you're not going to follow through with. If you do that again, I can remember myself doing that. If I find out you didn't do your homework again, you're not going to swimming. The next time I found out he hadn't done his homework again, I had to take swimming away. Or they realize it's just blank promises. You don't make a threat you're not going to follow through on. Maintain the routine. That's your top job. Work towards their independence, not towards your feeling good about it. Our children can't do for us. Our children can't do emotionally for us what they can't do for others. Oh, thank you. I know what that is. If you are getting into fights with your kids, speak to someone. Come to school. I say the first line of defense is school. Come and speak to the learning specialist. Speak to your children's teachers. Tell them we're having this struggle. See how they can help you or who they lead you to. A lot of people go to pediatricians, and obviously they have a lot of information. They don't necessarily have a lot of school information. So let school be the first line of defense if your fights are over school. So here are some scenarios. You've probably, if you have older kids, seen some of these. I want to play one video game before I get up. And then when they play 15 and you're like, seriously, you said 1, and they're like, I'm fine. I don't have much work tonight. Make them stick to, if I said 1, it's 1. And I say no video games before. No any of that before. Let that be the reward for after if they've done it well. It's online, I don't need to write it down. You know, actually they do need to write it down because online they have to keep screen flipping and they're going to forget things. But all of these you may have seen, here's a few more. What you have to remember, don't set up a fight. You can say, my expectation is, and if it doesn't work out and you realize you're just in a loop, pull in the specialists from school. Okay, so when they're added factors, we don't want to build a relationship where we think, where they think that they've let us down. We definitely do not want to get into that place where children say, my parents aren't proud of me. So don't get into the whole loop of fighting. We need to meet them where they are. They are developing. When they were learning to walk, we laughed when they fell and said, get back up, and encouraged them. And, you know, it was cute to watch them paddle, paddle, flop. And that's really what they're doing now. Only now we're like, seriously, why didn't you do that? We need to meet them where they are. And our job as parents is to make that safe and loving environment. If you cannot have them doing homework in your home and have it be a safe and loving environment for everybody, figure out somewhere else for them to do that. So the final points, I think I've hit most of these. Talk to the school first. The goal is that they're going to become independent. Everything you are doing, everything we are doing, whether we're educators or psychoprofessionals or schools or whatever, is building these children towards independence. And praise the process, not the result. If they got a C on a test, but you know they worked so hard, tell them you're really proud of their tenacity. You are so proud of how they worked with it. And now we'll do an error analysis and we'll figure out what we have to do differently next time, because we learn from our mistakes. Flip it to positive. So we need to think about all the ways that we can honor the process. We just don't do it for them. Be careful how you say it to them. Recognize it's developmental. Recognize they are on a continuum of growth. Recognize it's going to get a lot better. And so even in its 6th, 7th, 8th grade darkest moments, you can say, we're moving up. And you really want your children, if they're going to have moments of failure, you want it to be as early as possible. I work with several college kids who were shored up and shored up and shored up and shored up. And even in their senior year, had 3 and 4 and 5 people working with them, and had parents waking them up in the morning, and had everybody doing for them. And then somebody thought they were going to be successful. Your child needs to be independent before you send them to school, because you don't want the first place to fail to be the place they have spent their life working for. And this is the first time that they had a voice in what they wanted. And so many of my kids that are in college go, I never saw it coming. And then they tell me how many people were supporting them straight through high school. And I think, oh my God, that should be my next job. If I had $1 for every kid that I went, no, you're not gonna make it, I would be wealthy. In the back of the room, we have a couple of papers. The one that's the white with the sneakers, because I think a lot of times as parents, we forget what study skills are, is just an overview of study skills. If you are at a place where you're like, I don't remember how I did this, that's a booklet that we put together, literature we put together, just on helping parents think about what study skills are. The other piece we have back there is an article that Debbie did the interview with Dr. Kathy McCarthy, if any of you know her. She's a really good friend of ours. I've been friends with her for about 15 years. She's brilliant. She does a lot of work in this field in ADD, primarily with all of our kids. And the rush to competency is something that she's really looking at right now with our parental expectations, pushing our kids in a direction where they might be one of those rebounders, what I call rebounders, my college kids that came back. And right now, I have a child from Dartmouth. I have a child from Michigan. I have a child from Wesleyan. I have a Georgetown student. I mean, these are not schlucky schools that we're talking about. These are big universities that very, very, very smart kids came back from. The list could go on. I have no kids from anything other than named schools you would know. So what we don't want to do is just keep supporting and supporting and supporting, because God forbid I need the A. Allow your child to have some vulnerability and then help them where they are so that they become independent. That's so much more important than the resume straight A's. So I would like to invite all of you to think about reducing your reactivity. And what we're going to be doing is, because as parents, we all become reactive. This makes no sense. Executive dysfunction, once our brain has snapped in, makes no sense to us. On Thursday, January 19th, we're going to have a lunch and learn that we have a gentleman coming named Scott Morgan. He works in parent training and mindfulness for kids. He's just brilliant. But he's going to talk about how you can reduce your reactivity with children. We're going to have something up on our website in the next week, or probably a couple of weeks, given Christmas is coming, that you can sign up for. Come, bring friends, as many people as want. We just feel that as a community, all of us getting together and sharing is how we can kind of get through this most easily, because it's not something that we should all be doing in isolation, because we're all doing it. Oops. And if you want slides, you can email us at info@studypro, and we will send you the slides
For this.
for this presentation. Thank you. I think Amy's going to speak, and then we're going to do questions.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. This was awesome. This was great stuff. So I do want to introduce Amy Jones, and a couple things that you might not know about Amy Jones. This is her 4th year at Langley, and she has a Master's of Education from Harvard, very impressive, and a Postmaster's certificate in adolescent literacy from UVA. She has 25 years of experience working with kids in classrooms, I think grades 4 to 7 in various capacities. And was also a lower school division head for 13 years at another school. So,
and I'm going to speak fast, and I know it's almost 9:30, but I told myself, so I'll be quick. So thanks, Debbie and Kathy. I learned a lot, so I wish I had brought my pad. I just wanted to give you a snapshot about what's going on here at Langley in terms of executive functioning skills, and I think there's a lot of good news. In August of 2014, Kathleen Smith, our former assistant head of school, brought the Institute for Research and Development for Learning and Development to Langley to work with our faculty for a day during our preschool meetings, just to focus on how to help our kids become more strategic learners and how to create classrooms that promote executive functioning skills. So we've been working on that. Primary and lower school teachers do this pretty naturally. Any of you who've tried to organize a birthday party with 16, 7-year-olds know that if you don't work with kids to become sort of independent and self-starting, then it can be a disaster. So they do that quite naturally in their classrooms. And executive functioning can really start young, even though I think your graph in terms of when it really is kicking in. And the more you practice executive functioning skills, really those pathways are going to develop. And the myelin sheaths will make those pathways even faster. But some examples from primary school and lower school, and some of you know this, there's a schedule posted on every on every blackboard. You walk into even primary school, they have visual schedules, and the teachers go over those schedules every day, even if it's a picture. It gives them a sense of time and organization, even if they're just focusing on the fact that next they're going to movement if they're 4 years old. They know that next is movement. There's a morning message that greets all the kids, that highlights the day, what's going to happen. We've got movement today. We're going to have a special speaker. Tomorrow is the book fair. Also, I was in a 3-year-old classroom, and they were talking about, today is Thursday. Yesterday was Wednesday. Tomorrow is Friday. So from a very early age, you're seeing teachers work with children around time. And that makes a difference, even if you're 3 years old. In the older grade, students set goals, and I just brought a quick example. They do some brainstorming. This is from a 3rd grade classroom. How can I grow as a reader? They do a little brainstorming, and then they choose. I'm not great with organizing stuff sometimes. Then they choose 3 goals. And some teachers have them write their goals on their desk. So this child is finding a good spot to read, building his vocabulary, and trying new genre. So that's something that's on the desk. And then during the writing process, they're doing peer editing, they're doing self-editing to help develop the metacognitive process of their work, which is wonderful. And then also kids are given support for planning. I'm working in the 5th grade this year with reading. And this was a 5th grade project, and the teacher just decided to just include a calendar with the project. It was a project over 2 weeks. I wrote down the due date so I would know. Part 1 was due here, part 2 was due here, and it was due on this day. So again, it allowed the kids to have a visual. I'm a visual learner, so this actually really helps me. But then they could chunk it up. A lot of times kids need help chunking up long assignments, and teachers can help them do that. And then also, we prompt for self-reflection in many different ways. Again, this happened to be where I was. This is the reflection on that big project that took 2 weeks. What section of your project did you spend the most time on? Why did it take you the longest? What part of the project are you most proud of, and why? And if you do something different on your project, what would it be? So we want to continue to ask children to reflect on their work, to think about how they could get better at that. Middle school, and you spoke a lot about middle school teachers, we want them to be this. They're content specialists. So they're all about science. They're all about social studies. And they don't often sort of think about, and they have kids for a shorter period of time than a homeroom teacher does. So they don't naturally think about some of the general processes that you were talking about. So we need to be more intentional with our work with middle school teachers. So when I first arrived, Brian Jefferson and I got talking about study skills. We were calling them study skills before the ILD folks came. And we pulled together a group of middle school teachers who were interested in the topic. We read on executive function. We met over the summer. We conducted a faculty survey in terms of what they felt was most important in their content area. We conducted a student survey about executive function. They wanted a minute or 30 seconds at the end of each class to write down homework and to organize their binders. And they wanted 3-hole punch paper. Okay, 2 very, very easy things. It's funny what you get from kids. They know their stuff. And then we've also, and then we decided to focus on just 4 of the executive functioning aspects to focus on. Metacognition, studying and memory, planning and prioritization, which is connected to time management, and then an organization. And we've continued to work both in classrooms, but also with the advisory program on these, just these very things. So at the beginning of the year in advisory, kids mapped their week. I don't know, this was something they did at the very beginning. This is middle school. They were to look at things like, when did I get home? When does the bus drop me off? When's dinner? When's tennis? And then they were given, a chart of their week. And then they were to map that for themselves. Where's my free time? When can I do homework? So again, we're trying to sort of make these processes and these external structures really visible for students. Also, there was an activity in advisory where kids were, I think I wrote it, I was the student that was overwhelmed. And the kids had to work as a group to sort of think, oh my gosh, I've got so much homework. Amy's got so much homework. How can she learn to chunk this up and plan her week? And then most recently, before parent-teacher conferences, we had children fill out a self-reflection about, this is again, middle school, subject, teacher, this is, I covered up the name of this, what I think is going well, what I think I should continue to do, and what I think is not going well, and what I think I should do differently. So this child has Mr. Musgrove for math. I'm getting perfect scores on all of my X. I need to start understanding how things work. That's great. Language arts, I have annotated very well in my mind. And then what I need to work on is I need to start focusing a little bit more in class. Social studies, I'm understanding the curriculum very well. Goal, I'm not really raising my hand in class. So again, we're trying to give, and then this sheet came to parent-teacher conferences so that when the teacher was talking with the student about what's going well, what's not going well, they actually had a blank one, and they were most of them, we hope, were taking notes. So that was great. So we're continuing to work on those kinds of things. And then finally, I want to just say this work really dovetails beautifully with our work on inquiry and critical thinking skills, because it's all about becoming strategic. What will work in what situation and when? So to determine what strategies can I use, when can I use them, when do they make sense, are they effective, should I use them again? And I think that's what we really want from our children, to become more independent, in that we have a ways to go. We're just beginning some of this work, but I wanted to give you a sense that yes, this is true, and executive dysfunction is something that happens, but we're working with students here at Langley on becoming more strategic, and that's all I wanted to share. So thank you very much. And not my fleet.
The kids.
Oh, the kids. Oh yeah, this one.
Grade.
Yeah. And that one, the reflection,
that had the
math,
probably the two we get at. Okay, so you get this at home. All of a sudden, I was sitting there going, "This is so perfect," and this is the stuff that Langley's doing that other schools aren't doing. Giving a month of the class calendar is such a big deal. You get it at home. Maybe the students have written with the teacher the due date, the midpoint, the end date, so that they understand it. Then this is something that definitely is a parent piece that you could do with it. You sit down with them and you say, okay, here are the steps. And you know, honey, Thursday night, you've got soccer pretty late, so we're not gonna do anything there. We're gonna cross this out because you can only get all of the rest of your homework done. And we're going to each night decide what is the piece of these directions we're going to do. So I have now a daily plan for how I'm going to get this done, so the night before we're not in tears and staying up really late. Well, that piece we don't tell them. But you give them the ability to say, I'm going to do this much today, this much tomorrow. Do I have to work on the weekends? Do I not have to work on the weekends? But they have the amount of pressure that's taken off when teachers help children see that a month at a glance calendar can make their life so much easier. And this becomes then part of when you make those nightly homework plans. Often in their planners, there's this section that says other. I teach my kids that I work with to use that for any project that's ongoing. That becomes the other. It's nightly homework.
I would have a calendar at home, whether it be in your kitchen or family room, and have a calendar of all the, and it's a family calendar, all the things that are going on, all the, and the kids can do it. Anything with color coding, particularly, they'd love to do it.
And color code it, because they will see purple's me, and that's my, that's my soccer game, that's my voice lessons, whatever it is. Okay, questions?
I was interested in finding out if we know SSAT and these children that have lower executive function, does it transpire through with the bubble filling kind of test, or it doesn't show anywhere, or does it debilitate them in taking these tests, or is there any study as far as that goes?
So the Scantrons aren't really necessarily as focused on executive dysfunction as they are on overarching attention, that I lose my place, and or I have issues with regressions and eye movement. Those are the big ones that get the no Scantron on SAT, but
And the SSAT and ERBs, which we give here, are on the computer. There is a writing sample that's given, and correct me if I'm wrong, parents of kids who have just taken it, but I believe it's all on the computer. So you don't tend to, there's no issue with tracking or attention. You press a button on the ERB anyway, and then it brings up the next set of 3 questions.
and that's, for ERBs, it'll be fine. It's
But you can fill it
SATs.
out on paper.
On SAT, it's paper.
Oh, SAT.
SAT is paper, and it's not such an executive, the kids with executive dysfunction, by the time they take it, also, you take it for the first time as a practice your sophomore year, you've sort of started coming out of some of those lower ends. For executive function kids, it's not a huge problem for what is tracking that eye movement and or what's attention. If I lose my place easily on a page, then you take them off the Scantron.
And it may be a funny sort of question, but is there any like imaging done on the brains of the monkeys, and if they do have executive function, or that's where the limitation of their brain is? There is no executive functioning going on.
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know. I haven't looked at animal studies. I don't know. Okay.
When you were showing us the slides that showed the progression of the brain development, I'm wondering if there's a similar type of tracking that tracks creativity, because I understand the teen years are the explosive years for the teenage brain in creativity, and as the brain develops, does that tends to subside, that creativity? And is there a relationship between the development of executive function and creativity?
It's just where the brain is showing the most growth. It's not necessarily that one overtakes the other. The only thing that overtakes anything is the amygdala, and the anxiety response floods other parts of our brain. We lose creativity, we lose executive function, but nothing in creativity and executive function, one overtaking the other. It's just that one's lighting as growing more while the other is lighting as more secure.
I was wondering if in your experience at Potomac and now in your, given that the executive function sort of peaks at 20, whether you sort of find like gap year, especially for like a young child before they go to college, if you find that more beneficial because it gives them more time to grow, or if that's sort of just shooting fish in the
I
middle.
love gap years. Love gap years. I love gap years. I love gap years. For the kids that I work with, I have offered gap to several parents who is that child that I was just describing that has so much intervening still in their life, and they are not independent. I think a gap year is a phenomenal way for kids to grow up and develop without having the 0.3 track them the rest of their life. It's a hard time in college to come back from that horrible GPA. It's a lot easier to fall than it is to raise that GPA. So I love gap years.
And then you just, sorry, when you talked about the amygdala, you talked about anxiety. So for children with anxiety, so you're saying that affects then also their executive function? And
Yes.
so you deal with the, if you deal with the anxiety and you're working on that, will that then open up the executive function, or are you going to?
If you are dealing with the anxiety, you don't have comorbid where 2 things are happening at once. So basically, the anxiety can come out of the child's perception of themselves because of the executive dysfunction, but because the executive function will build into what is their appropriate adult process. And of course, all of us are slightly different on where we will land. Some of us are way more organized than others, even as adults. But the anxiety overlay definitely occurs, often coincides with the executive dysfunction that we think it is the byproduct of. And if we can either not allow that anxiety to occur and or to get the kids the help they need to stop the anxiety, and we're only working with executive function, then we're working back with a developmental piece that we can say, you will be fine. and let me help you externalize these processes until you can internalize them. The anxiety pulls things into a really bad place.
I'm particularly interested in, you said age 11, 12, things tend to fall apart. And is that a hormonally induced thing, or is that just?
Puberty is not good to executive function. They both hit simultaneously.
Well, and I guess I'm confused by, that seems to be the developmental stage that is acknowledged, and yet it's exactly when schools move to a model that demands so much more of children right at a time when they're falling apart. And
We moved to that model before we
What's the
knew.
logic behind that, and is it something that you're moving away from? Because new research says maybe that's not a good idea, or?
Well,
I
okay,
might answer that a little differently, and I don't have as much background in terms of the science, but I think that the middle school, and here at Langley, you know, we sort of semi-departmentalize in 5th grade. They do a little moving. They've got science, well, they've got science elsewhere, but they have Ms. Davidson for social studies, and they have Ms. Brewster for math, and Mr. Loach. So I think that my hunch is that things fall apart because the demands become greater. I don't know that it's a more, I haven't read that it's a more vulnerable period, but it's more vulnerable from my perspective because we're asking more of them. And so that's why we're working more intentionally with teachers in 5th through 8th grades around this kind of thing, because I think it's just at that time when you want to give the kids more external structures around planning their week, planning, thinking about you know, their time management. So that's our work here has been intentional 5 through 8, more intentional 5 through 8. And the programs that I know about really focus in on those years, because I think for the very, you know, it seems to be the time when it's needed most. I don't know that it falls, I don't know that it falls apart and then,
Doesn't
I know, that's mine.
scheduling play a big role in that for the school? I mean,
Yeah.
because see, I remember a stat that we heard at the board meeting was it takes a child when they're moving from class to class and subject to subject, like 8 minutes to actually make an effective transition.
right.
And when you have a 40-minute or 45-minute block of time, so the teachers are going to say, let's go.
Let's
And
go,
then
right.
the
We're
kids
moving.
are saying, I just want to find, you
We're
know.
moving to a new
this, that.
schedule.
Yeah.
I don't know that Eleanor has put that out. I don't know, but our schedule next year will be different. We had the scheduling consultant come in this fall, met faculty, met parents, met students, and we're going to a schedule where our classes will meet less frequently, but for longer periods of time for this very reason, because transitions can be so disruptive to learning. So, and you just get into something, if you can picture a science lab of 40 minutes, or an art class, you know, when you're building something. So you're just getting into the most important part of that exciting science experiment. Oh, we got to clean up. It's difficult to build in that time of, you know, writing an exit ticket. What did I learn? What questions do I still have? And I think that that's in response to some of this. And I think that it's going to be more sane for children as well as more sane for adults.
And the other piece is there are some kids who manage 6th, 7th, 8th really well. There are some kids who manage 6th, 7th, and 8th well. There are some kids who manage 6th, 7th, and 8th looking fine at school and being a little vulnerable at home. And we keep going down the continuum, you know, to some kids who are really falling apart everywhere. And some of that could be an anxiety overlay, and some of that could be that they are a very slow learner on executive function, or some of it could be that this is another place where some of the learning higher order thinking pieces come into play and other things could be playing in. I would say on your question about our school's going to do something differently, I think as parents, we need to look at, does my child fit the school that I have them at, want them at, whatever, and we have to be honest with ourselves because there are schools that do it all sorts of ways. And if my child may not fit, if I'm transitioning to a high school, and God knows I really want that name, but my child may not fit there, I need to look where they are going to fit.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
So the other thing that we kind of talked about, but didn't say specifically, is there's a whole other layer, which is the actual, so we talked about time management, plan, and organization, and all of a sudden you have today's homework due tomorrow, and then, you know, everybody's mastered that, and all of a sudden now you have 6, 7 different teachers that all have different requirements, and you have to do the time management planning. But then there's a whole nother layer, which is actual true study skills. So who taught you, and I'm not saying the school, but generally, I'm not talking about Langley, who taught you how to take really good notes out of text? Who taught you how to take really good notes in class? Who taught you how to take those text notes, take those class notes, and put them together and make a useful study guide? Who taught you, right, how to learn from the mistakes that you made on the class, on the test, and then get it better so in the midterm, you know what I mean? There's a lot of skills that have been disappearing from the schools because when we went to school, we learned all that, but now they're pushing the curriculum so hard down earlier. And I'm just talking overall, I'm not just talking about Langley, but I have a 17-year-old and I see it too, right? So there's a lot of skills. So when we're talking about what are study skills, I think a lot of times we forget. If you have younger kids and you told that first grader, go do this big project, they'll be like, huh? Because they have no idea because their executive function skills haven't developed yet. But now all of a sudden in 6th grade, they're supposed to know all that stuff. So the demands triple, right? It's, you have to manage your time and manage all these different teachers and all the expectations. All these teachers have content they're kind of pushing at us, but we don't really have them learn all the skills to be able to master all that. So that's the other piece of it that we didn't really talk that much about.
I'm just curious to know your views on medication. And is it a last resort or?
Helps me immensely.
Okay, so this is just gonna sound like I'm just avoiding, it's kid to kid.
Kid to kid.
And it's, for some kids, it's, okay, the first thing I'll say, if you're gonna medicate your child, please go to a psychiatrist. Your pediatrician probably is great. Your psychiatrist is keeping up with all the newest and greatest. Right now, they've just brought out some new meds again that, you know, I think the top psychologists are talking about, the top psychiatrists are using. Maybe doctors are, maybe pediatricians are. As my child would go, I would go only to a psychiatrist, and I'd pick the absolute best I could get into. I think that meds are absolutely essential for kids that need them. I think that sometimes we medicate, and often that might be through our pediatrician because we're seeing vulnerability and we're scared as adults, as their parents. And I don't necessarily think that's a good idea, which is why I'm saying go to the doctor who really was trained 100% in this, and then the meds are safe. They have determined that there are some kids that just cannot tolerate them, and then you figure something else out. But I also firmly believe that I have watched kids, yoga works for attention. I have watched kids, mindfulness works for anxiety. I don't think that just a pill is going to do it, and I would rather pull them off meds as quickly as possible. But that's my personal opinion.
What about meditation?
Fabulous, fabulous. Seriously, for when that anxiety overlay comes in, that's when I pull in as much as I can on, instead of adding the second pill, first try meditation. Your kids will like to go to meditation or yoga with you. That is something that you can do with them that they like get really, really into. My kids who go with their parents think it's just such a phenomenal outing, you know, and they're getting a lot out of it for themselves, but really the relationship with their parents is something that they talk about over and over and over again. And so, I mean, it has been proven to work, and I believe it works.
Is this something that Amy, that the school is considering incorporating?
Yeah, I think I'm Eleanor and Brent Locke are heading up our social and emotional learning sort of task force, and that's one of the pillars of Langley. And I think that's, I know part of the conversation has to do with when you're working on self-regulation, breathing, mindfulness, meditation, all of that is, and it's research-based as well.
But if your child does need to be medicated, I will say, please talk to a doctor. Don't just say, oh my God, I'm not doing that, because it is life-changing for the child that needs it.
Can I ask, I saw somewhere in the slide, executive functioning coach. What does an executive functioning coach actually do?
Code?
Coach.
That's what you are.
Oh, me.
What
A person who trained in, well, okay, so honestly, this could be a broad span of a lot of people throwing that at the end of their name. Most people that I consider executive function coaches either went through very, very heavy coaching training that actually started at Harvard, or they have graduate degrees in special education, specifically in usually ADHD and neuropsych-based degrees.
So it's more of a psychological coach.
Yeah.
Is there anything like an actual brain training things to push executive functioning or processing to speed up or take over or anything like that?
There are groups out there who do it, but they aren't always respected within the industry because they don't have empirical studies all the time to prove what they're offering. You know, if somebody says to you, I can increase your child's IQ by X%, be careful.
Okay. We're ready to wrap up this, and we're done. Thank you so much.